They called me too emotional to lead. Said I let feelings cloud my judgment when I flagged discrepancies in their precious budgets. 9 years of catching their mistakes, saving their asses from audit hell, working through weekends while they golfed. Too emotional, fine. I didn't argue. I just clicked one button, CC, added one email address to that $5,000 strategy retreat expense report. The one person Greg feared more than the IRS, his wife. My name is Monica Reed, and I've been invisible in conference rooms for 9 years. Not literally, though. Sometimes it felt that way when executives talked over me mid-sentence. 38 years old, senior financial analyst at Northfield Dynamics, and apparently too emotional to understand how real business works. The accusation came on a Tuesday morning that smelled like burnt coffee and Bradley Kerr's excessive cologne. Citrus and cedar, with undertones of pure condescension. He'd been our regional director for exactly 2 months, sliding into the position like he'd been born for it, which, given his Yale connections and his father's golf buddy on the board, maybe he had. "Monica," he'd said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair during our quarterly review meeting, "I appreciate your passion about these numbers, but sometimes I worry you're letting emotions drive your analysis." I'd just pointed out a $70,000 discrepancy in his departmental projections. Not with passion, with a spreadsheet. "The numbers don't add up," I'd said, keeping my voice steady as a flatline. "The allocation for the West Coast expansion doesn't match the approved budget." He'd smiled then. That particular smile men like Bradley perfect in business school. Patient, patronizing, like explaining quantum physics to a toddler. This is why we need leaders who can see the bigger picture, not get bogged down in details. Strategic thinking requires a certain detachment. Kelsey, his executive assistant, had actually giggled. 26, MBA from an online program, and shadowed Bradley like a designer-clad ghost. She took notes on an iPad with a pink case, nails clicking against the screen in a rhythm that matched her boss's breathing. The other men around the table, and they were all men, always men, shifted in their seats. Tom from operations studied his phone. Marcus from sales suddenly found the ceiling tiles fascinating. Nobody met my eyes. "I'll revisit the analysis," I'd said, because what else could I say? That I'd been doing this job since Bradley was probably failing his first finance course, that I'd caught 3 major audit issues last year alone, that would have cost us millions, that being thorough wasn't emotional, it was professional. But here's what I noticed. What I always noticed, the folder Bradley clutched during his little speech. Northfield Dynamics Green, labeled Q3 Strategic Planning Retreat, Santa Barbara. His fingers had drummed against it nervously, a gold wedding band catching the fluorescent lights. Later, back at my desk, the same desk I'd occupied through 3 restructures, 4 CEOs, and countless promises of promotion, I pulled up the expense tracking system. Force of habit, or maybe survival instinct. When you've been passed over as many times as I have, you learn to document everything. The retreat expenses were there, filed 2 weeks ago, conference room rentals, catering, transportation, all standard, all reasonable, except for one receipt tucked between a car rental and meeting supplies. Romantic weekend wellness package, Ocean View Suite. $5,000, charged to the company card. I stared at that receipt for 17 minutes. Not because I was shocked, nothing shocked me anymore about executive behavior, but because attached to the expense report was a note, reviewed and approved by K. Mitchell. Kelsey Mitchell, who'd been out with the flu the exact dates of the Santa Barbara retreat. The flu, in Santa Barbara, at the same luxury resort where Bradley had supposedly been leading strategic planning sessions. I downloaded the receipt, saved it in 3 different places. Then I went back to my spreadsheets, my formulas, my apparently emotional analysis of numbers that didn't lie, even when everyone else did. Bradley walked past my cubicle around 4:30 that afternoon, Kelsey trailing behind with her iPad and her giggle. He didn't look at me. Men like him never really looked at women like me, 38, single, competent. We were furniture, useful furniture that occasionally malfunctioned by pointing out uncomfortable truths. "Great meeting today," Kelsey chirped as they passed. "Really loved your insights on strategic thinking, Brad." Brad. She called him Brad. I smiled at my screen and kept typing. Let them think I was analyzing market trends or adjusting forecasts. I was actually searching through 2 years of expense reports, looking for patterns, finding them. Because here's what Bradley didn't understand about emotions: sometimes anger isn't hot. Sometimes it's ice cold and patient, filing away every receipt, every timestamp, every lie told in conference rooms that smell like citrus and male privilege. They called me too emotional to lead. They had no idea what kind of emotion was coming. 9 years of invisible labor creates its own kind of evidence. Every late night I'd spent fixing other people's mistakes. Every weekend stolen by last-minute emergencies. Every time I'd saved this company from its own incompetence, I remembered them all. Like the December night 3 years ago when Peterson from legal had miscalculated the tax implications of our Phoenix acquisition. I'd caught it at 11:47 p.m., sitting alone in the office while everyone else attended the holiday party I'd been too busy to join. Fixed it by 3 a.m. Peterson got promoted 2 months later. I got a fruit basket. Or the time our CEO changed the board meeting from Thursday to Tuesday, forgot to tell finance, then screamed at us for not having updated projections ready. I'd rebuilt the entire presentation in 4 hours, missing my nephew's birthday party. The CEO praised Bradley's predecessor for his team's agility. My name never came up. This is what they don't tell you about being competent and female in corporate America. Your excellence becomes invisible, expected, like oxygen. But let one mediocre man with the right handshake walk through the door, and suddenly he's revolutionary for suggesting we think outside the box or leverage our core competencies. Bradley's revolution began immediately. He scheduled 7:30 a.m. alignment sessions that were just him talking about his vision while we took notes. He replaced our detailed reporting templates with something he called dynamic dashboards, which meant colorful charts that told you nothing useful. He spoke in acronyms he'd invented, forcing us to decode his emails like they were CIA transmissions. "We need to sunset the old processes," he'd announced in week 3, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in circles and arrows that led nowhere. "Create space for innovation." Translation: he didn't understand our systems and didn't want to learn. But it was the little things I tracked most carefully, like how Kelsey's sick days always clustered around Bradley's out-of-town meetings, how their Outlook calendars showed curious gaps at the same times, how she'd upgraded from a Honda Civic to a Mercedes C-Class despite making an assistant's salary. I started a spreadsheet, personal, encrypted, backed up to a cloud service the company didn't monitor. Every receipt, every calendar anomaly, every time Bradley's wedding ring disappeared during working lunches with Kelsey. The photo came from an unexpected source. Raj from IT, fixing my computer after a suspicious crash, had glanced at my personal phone charging on the desk. "Hey, isn't that Bradley?" he'd asked, pointing to an Instagram story from a former colleague who'd moved to Santa Barbara. "Saw him at the airport last week during that big retreat." The photo showed Bradley in the Southwest Terminal, Kelsey beside him in oversized sunglasses and a sundress. Not sick, not home with the flu, just two people heading to a romantic weekend on the company's dime. "Must be a different guy," I'd said, screenshot already saved. Raj had given me a look, the kind that said he knew exactly what spreadsheet I was building in my spare time. "Yeah, must be." Bradley, meanwhile, continued his management revolution. He brought in consultants who charged $10,000 to tell us what I'd been saying for years. He restructured departments based on articles he'd skimmed in business magazines. He promoted men who laughed at his jokes and sidelined women who asked questions. "Monica's great with details," he'd said in my performance review, Kelsey taking notes on her iPad. "But leadership requires a different skill set, the ability to see past the numbers to the narrative. The narrative, like the one where a senior analyst who'd saved the company millions was too emotional to move up, while a man who'd been here 2 months was already planning to hire his golf buddy as our new CFO. "I understand," I'd said, fingers steady on the table, no visible emotion, just a woman accepting her place in the corporate hierarchy. That night, I'd updated my spreadsheet, added the VPN logs I'd legally requested for security compliance, traced how Bradley and Kelsey's logins came from the same IP address on multiple occasions, found the corporate card charges for bottles of Dom Perignon delivered to a Santa Barbara hotel room. They thought I was weak because I cared about accuracy, about doing the job right. They mistook my precision for pettiness. my attention to detail for inability to see the bigger picture. But I saw the picture perfectly. Every receipt painted another brushstroke, every lie added another color, and I was almost done with my masterpiece. A resignation letter. Something much better. The call came on a Wednesday at 2:15 p.m. HR wanted to see me. Not unusual, I often help them untangle payroll disasters or explain budget variances. But Diane from HR didn't usually sound like she'd swallowed glass when she asked me to come up. Bradley's office smell hit me first. That citrus cologne had contaminated the entire executive floor like corporate chemtrail. He sat behind his desk, hands folded, wedding ring prominent. Diane fidgeted with a folder Northfield green. Of course. Kelsey perched in the corner with her iPad, trying to look serious, but mostly looking smug. "Monica," Bradley began, using his TED Talk voice, "we need to discuss your future with Northfield Dynamics." I sat, waited. I'd learned long ago that silence made men like Bradley uncomfortable. They needed to fill it with their own importance. "As you know, we're entering a transformative phase," he continued, "adapting to market disruptions, evolving our organizational structure to be more agile." Diane cleared her throat. "What Bradley means is, we're restructuring the finance department." "Streamlining," Bradley corrected. "Creating a leaner, more dynamic team aligned with our strategic vision." I kept my face neutral, even as my mind translated, "We're firing you and keeping Chad from accounting who can't calculate percentages without a calculator." "Your position is being sunset," Diane said, not meeting my eyes. "Effective in 30 days. We appreciate your years of service, but the new structure requires different competencies." Different competencies, like the ability to golf, or laugh at Bradley's jokes about his ex-wife, or be named Tyler or Josh or Brad. "However," Bradley leaned forward, performative concern creasing his forehead, "we need you to complete the Q3 expense reconciliation before you go. Clean transition, you understand, professional." I almost laughed. They were firing me but needed me to finish the work nobody else could do, including, apparently, reconciling Bradley's own expense reports. "I received your 9.8 performance rating last month," I said quietly. "Highest in the department." Bradley's smile tightened. "Performance metrics don't always capture leadership potential. You're exceptional at what you do, Monica, but you've been doing the same thing for 9 years. Sometimes that suggests a lack of adaptability to changing priorities." "Or maybe," Kelsey added, stylus tapping against her screen, "it's about fit, culture fit." Culture fit, the corporate euphemism for you don't drink with us, don't flirt with us, don't make us comfortable by being appropriately inferior. The package is generous. Diane pushed a document across the table. 3 months severance, positive reference, continuation of benefits. All standard, all legal, all designed to make me go quietly. "And the Q3 reconciliation?" I asked. "Due Monday," Bradley said. "I know it's tight, but you're so good with the details. I'm sure you can handle it. My expenses are included. Of course, need to set the right example. Show the team how thorough documentation works." His expenses. He was literally asking me to process the evidence of his theft as my final act of service. "Of course," I said, taking the folder. "I'll make sure everything is properly documented." Diane relaxed slightly. Bradley's smile broadened. Kelsey made a note on her iPad, probably. "Meeting successful. Monica appropriately emotional none." "We'll announce the restructuring next week," Bradley said, already dismissing me by checking his phone. "Until then, business as usual. Professional discretion appreciated." I stood, folder clutched to my chest like armor. "Absolutely. You can count on my discretion." Back at my desk, I opened Bradley's Q3 expenses. Page after page of receipts, travel documents, credit card statements, all requiring my review. My signature. My final stamp of approval before I was shown the door. Santa Barbara, Miami, Austin, always during Kelsey's mysterious illnesses, always with duplicate charges, 2 dinners, 2 spa treatments, 2 of everything a married man shouldn't be buying on company funds. My computer screen reflected my face calm, composed, entirely unemotional. Inside, something crystallized. Not rage was hot and reckless. This was colder, precise. They wanted me to process these expenses. Complete the reconciliation, be professional. I opened a new spreadsheet, named it Q3 Expense Analysis, Executive Review. 30 days to wrap up 9 years. But really, I only needed the weekend. Because Monica Reed, too emotional to lead, too detail-oriented to see the big picture, was about to give them the most thorough expense reconciliation Northfield Dynamics had ever seen. Professional to the very end, I locked my office door at 6 p.m. that Friday. The executive floor had emptied hours ago. Bradley left at 3 for his standing golf game, Kelsey trailing behind with both their laptops. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive until 8. Just me, a pot of coffee, and several $1,000s worth of corporate fraud spread across my desk. The Santa Barbara folder revealed itself like a crime scene. First, the obvious 2 business-class tickets booked on the company card, Bradley Kerr and Kelsey Mitchell, seats 2A and 2B. Not even trying to hide it, the receipt timestamp showed 4:47 a.m. Who books romantic getaways before dawn unless they're lying next to their spouse, waiting for them to fall back asleep? Then the Hotel Ocean Cliff Resort and Spa. I'd priced it once for my mother's 70th birthday, before realizing it cost more than my monthly mortgage. Bradley had booked the Celestial Suite. King bed, private balcony, couples infinity pool. The reservation explicitly stated, romantic weekend package, in cheerful cursive font. I created my first slide, strategic planning retreat accommodations. The minibar charges told their own story. Champagne at 2:30 p.m., strawberries and chocolate at 4, more champagne at 11:45 p.m. The spa receipts were better than a romance novel. Couples moonlight massage. Tantric energy healing for 2. Private passion package including aromatherapy and heated stones. Slide 2 team building exercises. Room service painted the full picture. Oysters Rockefeller at 8 p.m., filet mignon for 2. A single dessert, chocolate lava cake with 2 spoons, the wine, a $300 Bordeaux that Bradley had categorized as client entertainment. Which client? The spreadsheet demanded specificity. I cross-referenced everything. Bradley's corporate calendar showed strategic planning sessions from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. each day, but the hotel's business center log. Yes, they'd used their room key to print something at the business center showed no activity. The conference room he'd supposedly booked never used. I'd called the hotel directly, pretending to be his assistant confirming details for next quarter. Mr. Kerr didn't use our meeting facilities, the helpful coordinator had said. But he did extend his suite reservation an extra night. Would you like me to reserve the romance package again? Slide 3, resource allocation efficiency. Kelsey's digital trail was equally damning. Her Instagram private, but not to someone who'd been following her since she started, showed careful gaps during her sick days, but she'd forgotten about tagged photos. There she was in a beach yoga class, location tagged Santa Barbara, posted by @YogiBlissBarb. There was Bradley in the background, attempting downward dog in swim trunks. The metadata was beautiful. Timestamps matching their spa appointments, GPS coordinates placing them at restaurants when they'd supposedly been in conference rooms. Even their Uber receipts charged to the company account showed rides from hotel to beach to winery. No convention center, no strategic planning. I built my spreadsheet with the loving care of someone who'd spent 9 years perfecting the art of financial analysis. Color-coded by category of fraud, hyperlinked to supporting documentation, formulas calculating the total $5,000, $247.83, in direct misappropriation of company funds. But the folder held more than just Santa Barbara. I'd asked for Q3 complete and Bradley, confident in my imminent departure, had given me everything. Miami, Southeast Regional Assessment, another romance package, this time with sunset sailing. Austin, Tech Conference attendance. The conference was real. Their attendance was not. Hotel charges showed movies ordered at 2 p.m., 3 p.m., and 4 p.m. on consecutive conference days. Denver. They hadn't even left town for this one. A downtown hotel during Kelsey's grandmother's funeral, the same grandmother who'd apparently died twice before, according to HR records. By 2 a.m., I had 54 pages of evidence, charts, graphs, receipts, photographs, metadata, a financial analyst's magnum opus, Every expense categorized, every lie documented, every pattern exposed with the kind of detail Bradley said I was too emotional to transcend. The coffee was cold. My neck ached, but my mind was crystal clear. Running scenarios, calculating impacts, seeing the bigger picture Bradley claimed I couldn't grasp. I could send this to the board, to the SEC, to the IRS. Tax fraud was still fraud, after all. But systems protect men like Bradley. They'd investigate quietly. Let him resign with dignity. Maybe dock his bonus. Kelsey would get transferred. Life would go on. No. Bradley deserved something more personal. Something that matched the personal nature of telling me I was too emotional to succeed while he was literally billing his affairs to the company we both worked for. I saved everything to multiple drives, encrypted, backed up. Then I opened Bradley's emergency contact form. Every executive had one on file, and I had access for another 27 days. There it was. Spouse Caroline Kerr. Email Caroline. Kerr@prescottmail.com. I stared at that email address as dawn crept through my office window. Somewhere in Michigan. Caroline Kerr was probably sleeping beside an empty pillow, unaware her husband's strategic planning involved tantric massages with his assistant. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. But sometimes, they could tell the truth to exactly the right person. Saturday morning. I went deeper. 9 years of access meant 9 years of data, and Bradley had only been here 2 months. But men like him didn't suddenly start stealing at 45. They had patterns, histories, digital fingerprints they thought were invisible. I started with his corporate credit card history. Every executive's spending data lived in our system going back 5 years. SEC compliance required it. Bradley's previous company, Meridian Tech Solutions, had transferred his records when he joined. Professional courtesy between Fortune 500 finance departments. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in slow motion. 2018 client dinner at Le Bernardin in New York, except the receipt showed 2 people, and his calendar showed no client meetings that day. His assistant, then a woman named Jennifer, according to LinkedIn, she'd left Meridian abruptly 3 months later. 2019 multiple vendor consultations in Las Vegas during CS Week. Bradley attended exactly 0 conference sessions, according to the attendee logs I found in our shared industry database. But he did charge $4,000 at the Wynn, including something called a desire package at their spa. 2020. The pandemic should have stopped him. It didn't. Virtual conference fees that traced back to boutique hotels within driving distance, always Thursday through Sunday, always when his wife's Facebook showed her visiting her sister in Florida. I built a timeline. 19 trips over 2 years that followed the same template. Assistant gets sick. Bradley has urgent business. Company pays for romance. The amounts varied, $2,000 here, $6,000 there, but the pattern was consistent. Even the wine preferences stayed the same, always French, always overpriced, always charged as client entertainment. Kelsey wasn't his first. She was just his latest. The Outlook data told another story. I'd exported every calendar entry, every meeting note, every travel request. The assistant's sick days clustered around Bradley's trips with mathematical precision. The probability of this being coincidence, I ran the calculation 2%. I created visualizations, heat maps showing the correlation between his travel and their absences, scatter plots of expense amounts versus meeting productivity, spoiler inverse relationship, a particularly damning Gantt chart showing how strategic planning always coincided with couples' spa treatments. But the masterpiece was the network analysis. I'd traced every receipt, every vendor, every charge, building a web of connections that looked like a constellation of financial infidelity. At the center, Bradley Kerr, with 19 different nodes representing trips, connected to 3 different assistants over 5 years, totaling $97,483 in misappropriated funds. Just from what I could document, the real number was certainly higher. I thought about Caroline Kerr again. The photo on Bradley's desk showed a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s, standing on what looked like their yacht. She had the kind of smile that said she'd worked for everything she had, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Would she miss this? By Sunday evening, I'd compiled everything into a single report, clean, professional, devastating. The executive summary alone contained enough evidence to end Bradley's career. The appendices. Those were art, every receipt annotated, every pattern explained, every lie exposed with the kind of brutal clarity that only numbers could provide. I'd titled it simply, Q3 Executive Expense Audit, Comprehensive Review. Subtitle: Analysis of Recurring Discretionary Spending Patterns. The kind of boring title that would make Bradley's eyes glaze over if he bothered to review it. He wouldn't. Men like him assumed women like me would process their theft quietly, stamp it approved, and disappear with our severance checks. But there, on page 47, I'd added a special section, Spousal Notification Recommendations. Due to the personal nature of certain expenses, I'd written in perfect corporate speak. It is recommended that all stakeholders be informed of spending patterns that may impact family financial planning. All stakeholders, including spouses. I saved the report in 17 different formats: PDF, Excel, PowerPoint, even created an interactive dashboard. Bradley loved dashboards where you could filter by assistant name, location, or type of service purchased. The VPN logs from Friday night showed Kelsey accessing her company email from Bradley's IP address at 11:30 p.m., again at 1:15 a.m. They were probably in bed, planning their next strategic retreat while his wife slept alone in Michigan. I leaned back in my home office chair, watching the cursor blink in the CC field of my draft email, one email address away from detonation. Caroline, Kerr@PrescottMail.com. Monday morning, I'd submit the expense report as requested, every receipt approved, every charge documented, every pattern preserved for posterity. But first, I had one more addition to make. A simple note on the final page. This report has been distributed to all relevant parties for full transparency and accountability. All relevant parties. Bradley wanted me to be professional, to complete my duties with discretion. I'd never been more professional in my life. Monday morning arrived gray and damp. Seattle pretending to be London. I sat at my desk by 7 a.m., the final expense report glowing on my screen, every receipt coded, every charge categorized, every lie preserved in permanent digital amber. The email was already drafted, professional, succinct, the kind finance department sent 100 times a day. To Bradley, Kerr@Northfield Dynamics, CC Diane, Morrison@Northfield Dynamics, AP Finance @Northfield Dynamics, subject Q3 expense report. Executive review complete. Dear Bradley, per your request, I've completed the comprehensive Q3 expense reconciliation. All receipts have been verified and documented. The attached report includes detailed analysis of spending patterns and recommendations for future fiscal optimization. Please review and approve at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Monica Reed, Senior Financial Analyst. My finger hovered over the CC field. One click to add Caroline's email. One moment to change everything. But I'd learned something over the weekend. Building my financial masterpiece. Systems that protect men like Bradley don't just exist in corporate hierarchies. They exist in our hesitation, in our second-guessing, in the voice that says, be professional, when what we mean is, be complicit. I thought about every woman who'd been called too emotional in a conference room, every analyst told they couldn't see the big picture while watching executives steal the small one, every professional who'd processed fraud with a smile because that's what good employees do. Caroline Kerr didn't know me, but she knew women like me. We'd probably passed each other at corporate events. Two wives of the industry, one literal, one metaphorical, both serving men who saw us as furniture. I added her email to the CC field. Then I remembered something else. The board meeting next week. The quarterly stakeholder review. The presentation where Bradley would stand in front of investors and talk about fiscal responsibility, while his theft sat approved in our system. I pulled up the investor relations directory, added 3 more emails, board members who might find the spending patterns. Interesting. The head of our internal audit committee, she deserved transparency too. The SEC compliance officer we kept on retainer, just for completeness. By 7:45 a.m., the CC field looked like a small army, all legitimate stakeholders, all people with valid interests in executive spending patterns, all professionals who understood that numbers don't lie, even when executives do. Bradley walked past my cubicle at 8:15 a.m., cologne announcing him like a herald. He didn't look at me. Why would he? I was already furniture being moved out. "Morning, Monica," Kelsey chirped, trailing behind with her pink iPad case and her Mercedes keys. "How's the expense report coming?" "Just sending it now," I said, cursor hovering over send. "Great." She actually bounced. "Brad's taking the team to lunch to celebrate closing the Henderson deal. You should come." "Oh, wait." She trailed off, remembering I wasn't really team anymore. Well, maybe next time. There wouldn't be a next time, for any of us. I watched them settle into Bradley's office, door closing on their private world of fake meetings and real affairs. Somewhere in Michigan, Caroline Kerr was probably having her morning coffee, checking her email before starting her day. I clicked send. The email disappeared into the digital ether, carrying 54 pages of evidence to 17 different recipients. The loading bar moved slowly, processing attachments, confirming delivery. Each name turned green. Sent, received, opened. I leaned back in my chair. 9 years of invisible labor complete. They'd asked for professional discretion. They'd gotten professional transparency. They'd wanted me to process the expenses quietly. I'd processed them thoroughly. My computer pinged. A read receipt from Caroline Kerr. 8:23 a.m. Then another. The audit committee chair. Another. The SEC compliance officer. I closed my laptop, packed my personal items into the same box I'd used for 3 different desk moves. My spider plant, my coffee mug, the photo of my nephew. Everything that mattered fit easily. Everything that didn't would stay behind to watch what happened next. Diane from HR appeared at 8:37 a.m., face pale. "Monica, did you just send the completed expense report?" "Yes, Bradley needed it today." "But the CC list, all relevant stakeholders, as required by our transparency guidelines." I pulled out my employee handbook, tabbed to the relevant page. Section 47.3 financial documentation should be shared with all parties having legitimate interest in fiscal accountability. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Down the hall, Bradley's door burst open. Even from here, I could see his face shifting from confusion to comprehension to something that looked remarkably like fear. His phone was ringing, the landline, the one that only rang for important calls. "Morning, Bradley," I called out cheerfully. "Beautiful day for transparency, isn't it?" He stared at me, and for the first time in 2 months, Bradley Kerr actually saw Monica Reed. Not furniture, not a too emotional analyst, but the woman who just CC'd his wife on $5,000 of marriage-ending evidence. "You," he started. "Processed your expenses. Yes, thoroughly, professionally, with absolutely no emotion whatsoever." Kelsey appeared behind him, pink iPad clutched to her chest. Mercedes keys forgotten. Her phone was buzzing, Instagram notifications, probably. Amazing how fast tagged photos spread when people started looking. I picked up my box. 9 years balanced carefully in my arms. "By the way," I added, heading for the elevator, "Caroline's in the investor relations distribution list. Standard protocol for executive family members. I do hope she finds the analysis helpful for your family financial planning." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, turned around. Bradley still stood frozen in his doorway. Phone ringing, career ending, marriage imploding, all from one CC line. "Have a great lunch," I said as the doors closed. "I hear the Henderson deal is worth celebrating." The last thing I saw was Kelsey's face, realizing she'd need to find her own way to pay for that Mercedes. Emotional, maybe. Effective, absolutely. The beauty of digital communication is its silence. Wars can be waged. Empires can fall. Marriages can end, all without a sound louder than fingers on keyboards. I didn't go back to Northfield Dynamics. Didn't need to. My keycard would work for another 29 days, but my work was complete. Instead, I sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, laptop open, watching the aftermath unfold through the beauty of real-time systems I still had access to. 9:47 a.m. Bradley's assistant access revoked. Kelsey Mitchell. User privileges suspended. 10:15 a.m. Emergency board meeting scheduled. Subject line, Urgent Fiduciary Responsibility Review. 10:32 a.m. All hands email from CEO. Northfield Dynamics takes financial integrity seriously. Investigating allegations. Committed to transparency. My phone buzzed. Raj from IT. Holy shit! Monica, his wife is here. In the lobby. Security doesn't know what to do. I sipped my latte. Caroline Kerr had driven 4 hours from Michigan. That's not the response of a woman who dismissed this as a misunderstanding. More texts flooded in. Former colleagues who'd suddenly remembered I existed. Did you see the email recall attempt? Bradley tried to pull it back. Kelsey's LinkedIn says, seeking new opportunities already. They're auditing 5 years of expenses now. 5 years. But the best notification came at 11:58 a.m. Not a text or email, a LinkedIn request. Caroline Kerr, CEO of Prescott Manufacturing. Her message was brief. Ms. I'd like to thank you for your thorough analysis. If you're ever interested in a position where attention to detail is valued, not punished, please call me. Caroline. Attached was her direct number. I stared at that message, then laughed, actually laughed, alone in a coffee shop, like the crazy unemployed woman I technically was. By 2 p.m., the texts painted a clear picture. Caroline had walked into Northfield's executive floor in what Raj described as full murder couture. She demanded and gotten a closed-door meeting with the CEO, the board chair, and legal counsel. Bradley had been escorted from the building by 3 p.m., banker's box in hand. No farewell tour, no goodbye lunch, just gone. They're saying he resigned to pursue other opportunities. Diane from HR texted, but his keycard was deactivated before he reached his car. Kelsey's exit was quieter. A resignation email at 3:47 p.m. To focus on personal growth and new challenges. Her Mercedes had been leased through the company. She left in an Uber. I closed my laptop as evening approached. The coffee shop was filling with the after-work crowd. All dark suits and loud voices and plans for happy hour. Nobody noticed the woman in the corner who'd just destroyed a man's life with a CC line. My phone rang. Unknown Michigan number. Monica Reed. The voice was exactly what I'd expected. Crisp, controlled, amused. Caroline. I meant what I said about the position. I've been reviewing your work history. 9 years of excellence treated as background noise. I don't run my company that way. Through the coffee shop window, I watched Northfield's building light up as people worked late, probably dealing with the chaos I'd created. Somewhere in that tower, forensic accountants were discovering what I'd already documented. Patterns spanning years, assistants who'd left suddenly, trips that never made business sense. Can I ask you something? Caroline's voice carried a different note now. The timestamp on your analysis. You worked all weekend on this. I did. After they'd already fired you, after it didn't matter to your career anymore. Yes. A pause, then, why care that much about a company that didn't care about you? I thought about it, about 9 years of being furniture, about every meeting where my voice was ignored, about being called too emotional by a man who billed his affairs to our shareholders. It wasn't about the company, I finally said. It was about the truth. Numbers don't lie. They deserve to be heard. Caroline laughed sharp, appreciative. 6 months ago, I hired a CFO who said exactly the same thing. She's been looking for a deputy, someone who sees patterns others miss, who isn't afraid to CC the right people when necessary. Outside, the Seattle drizzle had started again, the kind that made everything look like a watercolor painting, all blurred edges and running colors, beautiful in its own way. When would you need an answer? I asked. Take your time. I'll be in Seattle next week for divorce proceedings. Perhaps we could have dinner, discuss the position properly. After we hung up, I sat in that coffee shop until it closed, watching the city lights reflect in the rain. My phone occasionally buzzed with updates. The audit expanding. The FBI mentioned. Bradley's name trending on financial Twitter. But I didn't need the updates. I knew how this story ended. It ended the way it should have years ago. When the first assistant quit suddenly. When the first receipt didn't match the story. When the first lie was processed as truth. It ended with transparency, with accountability, with one woman deciding that being called emotional was better than being complicit. My reflection in the window looked different somehow. Same face, same expression, but something had shifted. Maybe it was just the lighting. Or maybe it was the power of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, furniture could rearrange the entire room. I packed up my things, left a tip, headed home. Tomorrow, I'd start looking at apartments in Michigan. Tonight, I'd sleep better than I had in 9 years. Funny what one CC line could do to a $5,000 lie. Funny what it could do to a life. 1 week later, the story hit the financial press. Northfield Dynamics executive expense scandal expands. Bradley's name in bold. His corporate headshot looking particularly smug next to phrases like misappropriation of funds and pattern of financial misconduct. The best part. They quoted directly from my report. My charts appeared in the Wall Street Journal. My analysis became evidence in what reporters called a textbook case of corporate expense fraud meets personal misconduct. I read the articles from my empty apartment. Boxes packed for Michigan. Employment contract with Prescott Manufacturing signed. Double my Northfield salary. Direct report to the CFO. And Caroline's personal promise. I don't promote based on golf handicaps. The internal company email leaked. Of course, these things always do. Someone forwarded it to a reporter, who forwarded it to everyone. There it was, my original message. CC list visible for the world to see. The financial Twitter crowd called it the CC heard round the corporate world. This is why you don't mess with your analysts, one commentator wrote. They have receipts, literally. But the universe saved its best joke for last. Tuesday morning, 11:23 a.m. My phone rang. Diane from HR. Monica, I know you're no longer with the company, but we have a situation. The forensic accountants need someone who understands our expense system. The new interim CFO is willing to pay consulting rates. Triple your previous hourly. I nearly choked on my coffee. They wanted to pay me 3 times my salary to explain the fraud I'd exposed after they'd fired me for being too emotional. I'm afraid I'm not available, I said. I've accepted a position where my attention to detail is considered an asset, not a liability. Silence. Then, I understand. Congratulations. And Monica, off the record, that was the most beautiful fuck you I've ever seen in corporate America. Even HR appreciated art when they saw it. The movers came Thursday. As they loaded my life into a truck bound for Michigan, my neighbor stopped by. Margaret, 73, retired teacher, keeper of all building gossip. I saw the news about your company, she said. That executive who got fired. Were you involved in that? I smiled. I just processed some expense reports. Nothing dramatic. She studied me with those teacher eyes that missed nothing. Honey, I taught high school for 30 years. I know revenge when I see it, and that was poetry. The moving truck pulled away. My car was packed. GPS set for Michigan. New life waiting. I took one last look at the Seattle skyline, at the Northfield building gleaming in the distance. Somewhere in that tower. They were still untangling Bradley's financial web, still finding receipts, still discovering patterns. They'd probably hire someone to do my job, someone appropriately unemotional, someone who wouldn't notice when the numbers told stories about executive spa days and assistant sick leave. Good luck with that. I drove east toward mountains and new beginnings, phone buzzing with messages I'd check later, job offers from recruiters who'd suddenly discovered my worth, interview requests from journalists wanting the inside story, a DM from a young analyst at a Fortune 500 company. Thank you for showing us it's possible to fight back. But the last message was the one that mattered. Caroline Kerr, my new boss, my unexpected ally. Saw the journal article. My divorce lawyer particularly enjoyed the spa receipt analysis. See you Monday. We have some expenses to review. 3 days later, I stood in my new office at Prescott Manufacturing, corner view, real walls, a nameplate that read Deputy CFO instead of Senior Analyst. The kind of office where people knocked before entering, where my opinion mattered, where being detail-oriented was the whole damn job description. Caroline stopped by that first morning, coffee in hand. I've been thinking about your story, about being called too emotional. You know what's really emotional? Stealing from your company to fund your affairs. But they never get called on it, do they? Not usually, I agreed. Well, she raised her mug in a toast. Here's to changing usually, 1 cc at a time. We clinked ceramic, two women who understood that the best revenge wasn't served cold. It was served with complete documentation, appropriate stakeholder notification, and absolutely no emotion whatsoever. Somewhere, Bradley Kerr was updating his LinkedIn, trying to explain a 2-month tenure that ended in federal investigation. Kelsey was probably selling her jewelry to make rent. The Northfield board was implementing new expense controls that should have existed years ago. And Monica Reed, she was finally visible, finally valued, finally vindicated. All because she'd been too emotional to let them win. Funny what 1 cc line can do to a $5,000 lie. Funny what it can do to a life. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and sweet justice. I'm curious, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed Monica's story of turning spreadsheets into weapons, please subscribe to the channel for more tales of workplace karma. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced corporate revenge? What did you think of Monica's calculated takedown? Share your stories in the comments below. Until next time, remember sometimes the best revenge is just hitting CC on the truth.